They're not busy, they're just busy, calculating whether helping you would benefit them in any way. That is one of the coldest truths about human nature, because most people do not move through life with pure generosity. They move through life with a silent cost-benefit analysis running in the background. Every message, every favor, every invitation, every act of support gets filtered through one hidden question. What do I get from this? And that question is not always malicious. Sometimes it is practical. Sometimes it is survival. But when you understand that almost everyone is doing it, you start to see the world differently. You stop mistaking access for affection. You stop confusing politeness with loyalty. You stop assuming that silence means they are thinking of you, when in reality, they may simply be deciding whether you are worth their energy. This is why loneliness can feel so brutal. Not because you are actually invisible, but because people can sense, almost instantly, when someone has less power in the social marketplace, less status, less leverage, less emotional protection. And once they sense that, the temperature changes. Suddenly, replies take longer. Suddenly, promises become vague. Suddenly, the people who once seemed warm become strangely unavailable. Not because they are overwhelmed, because they have quietly decided that your need is more expensive than your value. And here is where it becomes dangerous. When someone is lonely, they often start over-explaining themselves, over-giving, over-apologizing, over-performing. They think if they become easier to love, easier to help, easier to keep around, people will finally stay. But that desperation has a smell. It tells others you are already investing more than you are receiving. It tells them you are hoping, and hope, in the wrong hands, becomes a weakness. That is why some people are not rejected loudly. They are just slowly deprioritized until they disappear without anyone needing to say the words. No fight, no drama, no obvious betrayal. Just 1,000 tiny decisions that all point in the same direction. Not now, later, maybe, eventually, never. The most painful part is that this often happens right in front of you, and still you doubt your own perception. You tell yourself they must be busy. You tell yourself everyone is stressed. You tell yourself it is temporary. But deep down, something in you knows. They are not unavailable because they cannot help. They are unavailable because helping you does not improve their position. And once a person learns that lesson, they become harder to manipulate, harder to drain, and harder to seduce with fake kindness. Because now they can see the pattern. They can see who gives only when watched, who disappears when there is no benefit, who calls it compassion, but only when it is convenient. And just when you think this is all just social selfishness, the next layer is darker, because some people do not merely calculate whether helping you is profitable. They calculate whether your loneliness makes you easier to control. And that is where the game changes completely. Because now, it's no longer about indifference, it's about strategy. There are people, quiet, observant, emotionally intelligent, who can read loneliness the way a predator reads a wound. Not with cruelty on the surface, but with precision underneath. They don't rush, they don't force, they position themselves. They watch how quickly you reply. They notice how often you initiate. They track how much you reveal, how soon you trust, how easily you forgive, delays, excuses, inconsistencies. And then they begin to shape your reality. At first, it feels like relief. Finally, someone who listens. Finally, someone who responds. Finally, someone who sees you. But what you don't realize is that this attention is not constant by accident. It is controlled, given in doses, pulled back at the exact moment you start to rely on it, returned just enough to keep you from walking away. This is not connection. This is conditioning. Because the human brain is wired to chase intermittent rewards. The same mechanism behind addiction. You don't get hooked by consistency. You get hooked by unpredictability. One day they are warm, the next, distant. One message feels intimate, the next, cold and short. And suddenly you're no longer asking, "Do I like this person?" You're asking, "What did I do wrong?" That shift is everything. Because the moment you start questioning yourself instead of questioning them, control has already been established. Now you try harder. You become more available. You lower your standards. You accept less than you normally would, just to get back to that brief moment of warmth they gave you in the beginning. And they know it. They can feel the shift in your energy, the subtle increase in your effort, the way your tone softens, the way your boundaries blur. And once they confirm that you are now invested more than they are, they slow down even more. Because now you're chasing. And people rarely value what is always within reach. This is why some of the most dangerous dynamics don't look toxic from the outside. There's no shouting, no obvious abuse, just an invisible imbalance of power, growing quietly over time. One person is deciding, the other is hoping. One person is controlling the pace, the other is reacting. And the cruelest part, the person being controlled often believes they are finally close to something real. Because loneliness doesn't just make you vulnerable to others. It distorts your perception of reality. It makes breadcrumbs feel like a feast. It makes inconsistency feel like mystery. It makes emotional unavailability feel like depth. And by the time you realize what's happening, you're no longer just dealing with another person. You're trying to break free from a psychological loop that was designed around your need to not be alone. A loop that keeps asking the same silent question over and over. If I just give a little more, will they finally choose me? And the answer, though rarely spoken out loud, is the one truth most people spend too long avoiding. They already chose, just not you.